soil lead testing in communities, communicating risk and limiting exposure. Because in this presentation, I actually bring a lot of points that we discussed in the last 2 days. And this was done with collaboration with Dr. Howard Milkey, who you probably already met. So the overarching goal for today's presentation, which is really more about visuals and communicating science rather than typical case studies that I would present in the past at Triple Essay. So we aim to test urban soils and educate communities about potential human health exposure and remediation strategies. Originally, I came from, before I was in New York City and now I'm in Louisiana. So it's really bringing these test abilities and communicating new ideas in academia. And we're doing this by demonstrating the applicability of portable X-ray fluorescence or PXRF analyzer for mapping soil lead in urban environments, by applying the information towards prevention of children or potential children lead exposure through mapping and development of mitigation strategies. And of course, educating communities about the urban soil science and importance of soil testing. There are many different ways, and some of you probably use this instrumentation to test heavy metals. I'm not going to go over them. I just want to highlight that there are varieties of different advanced technologies on how we can do testing. And for the most part, I've been using X-ray fluorescent analyzers. However, last year, in collaboration with Italian scientists, we actually developed a methodology how to use visible near-infrared spectroscopy and correlated with a bioaccessible lead, the fraction that potentially available for human uptake. So there are other techniques how we can use different instruments to test soil with non-destruction. And there is a QR code, of course, for you to screen if you want. Most of my research have been using this instrument, XRF, and it's been highlighted in the last couple of days as well. There are different ways how you can implement it. It can be surface testing, and like on the left image, if you will do it primarily for children lead exposure, you want to know what's on the surface and how kids can potentially be exposed. Or if you want to do it for agricultural purposes and you want to grow vegetables or trees, and you want to know what is at the certain depths, you can actually do it, collect samples at certain depths, or dig a pit and do XRF right there. And also it's a cool application to study some pedological properties. So there is a way more application for XRF than just heavy metals. You can also study nutrients and look for a correlation with the clay mineralogy and many different cool things. Last year, we, together with Dr. Milky, we published an article where we compared actually 4 most common tests or methods that have been used in sciences. And of course, it's portable XRF, EPA 3050B. It's a standard protocol for total concentration analysis using acids. 1 molar nitric is not as acidic, not as strong as the EPA method, but still it's quite a strong acid that mimics a gastric solution. And RBLP is basically the method that uses the glycine solution at pH 1.5 to evaluate potential bioaccessibility of lead. What we've seen here doing through statistical analysis that all of this method actually in agreement, and we see very high p-values, and it gives us confidence that we can use a portable XRF for our analysis, which has really an advantage of doing tests, more samples at the larger areas at much faster rate than doing chemical extractions of limited number of samples. And of course, whoever is doing those tests has to be trained in hazardous materials, and acid waste is another issue. However, we did try to implement another test with XRF. We came up with this method to use XRF for liquids. It's not commonly done, but actually it has this capability as well. And we created the method where you could use a glycine solution like in the field to create an extraction and test it in the field. But still it has limitations. You're not going to have the same number of samples as you would point it and shoot it right in the soil. There is acid waste problem, and whoever is operating it needs to be trained because it's acid hazard. So it brings us back to using more portable XRF for the total concentrations. And then if we need to test more, if we want to know the bioaccessibility or bioavailability, nutrient extractions, we can choose what are the best samples for us to test and take it to the next level. Last year, I opened up the Delta Urban Soils Laboratory. For almost a decade, I lived and worked in New York City. And in 2020, I brought my experience from the Big Apple to Burjuni Acadiana. And together, under mentorship, actually, Dr. Milky and Maxine Levin, former national leader at NRCS, for soil interpretation, they guide me how to open my own lab and involve students in this type of research. And my really focus is on urban soil contamination and remediation, but it has a much broader impact than just that. Last year, we also had a grand opening, and talking about communication, we involved a communication department at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, who invited media, and we had a TV. It's a screenshot from the little clip that came out. We had numerous newspaper articles about this article. So this is how we brought attention to the lab and said that we exist beyond the map. Because before, people typically think for soil testing only LSU lab, but as far as I know, they don't test heavy metals. They mostly focus for agriculture. And this is where we separate, because we focus for urban agriculture, urban gardeners, farmers, amendment companies, or parents who want to know what's in their backyard. So it's really for smaller communities and amendment companies. It's turned out a lot of people want to know what's in their fertilizers and amendments that they create. And it became really a big number of clients for our lab. The university really pushes us to have research in the undergraduate experience. And I really like this because I can use my students to help collect soil samples. This little clip came from last week. We actually had training with NRCS, who our NRCS in Louisiana. They are former students from our department. So they train my students now who potentially become their own employees. So having this partnership also helps to bring attention to urban soils, because traditionally NRCS were working more on agricultural soils. And they help to spread the word about the lab. And of course, help train the students. So we go to the field, sample soils being collected mostly by students, undergraduate or graduate students, under my supervision. Last week we did in the new park. So this park is just newly developed. And before, in the summer, we did a test actually in socially disadvantaged communities in Lafayette, low-income housing. And of course, we saw some differences compared to other areas that are just newly developed. And we take these samples to the lab and further analyze them in the lab with portable XRF, because it gives us more accurate results and lowers heterogeneity of the samples. Earlier this morning, Dr. Dan Richter from Duke University said that every city needs to have a soil lab. So this became my goal as well. And in Lafayette, we started collecting the samples in residential homes and parks, and we start mapping it. So currently we have over 150 samples. There are more waiting in the lab. And we, of course, start seeing some patterns that older parts of the city and socially disadvantaged communities would have higher concentrations of lead compared to the south part of Lafayette that is actually new development. And it's mostly like new subdivisions are built on just forested areas that used to be forest. But what we see here is a common pattern that also was mentioned a lot in Dr. Milke's research and many other researchers who study soils, that the soil is super heterogeneous. And on one block or on one lot, we can see the differences. And here's a close-up of a vacant lot that is about to become a community garden, where we can see there are different numbers. And that's why using this portable X-ray analyzer is really useful, because we can collect more samples and see where the problem is, rather than have one representative sample. But how do we reach out to people and not overwhelm them with science? Because sometimes it's hard for them to figure out what they need to do. So when I ask my students who want to volunteer in the lab, and students love volunteering in the soil lab, I ask them, do you have any artistic background? Because I want them to help me to create something useful for people and very artistic and easy to understand. So they help create some cool infographics that describes how to do soil sampling and mitigate soil contamination. And then I also like publishing articles, not only in science journals, but also in a landscape design magazine, like in this example. It helps to bring attention to other audiences and other professions or professionals. I didn't stop there. I figure out if you want to change opinion or behavior of people, it's quite hard to do with adults, but children, they are the future. So we expose them to importance of soil or contamination at the early age, then we might be right on time. But kids always come with parents. So here's my opportunity. We create super cool activities for children while they play with soil, look at microscope, paint with soil paint, like in the middle picture. At the same time, I can talk to parents about potential testing on soil, and they can bring their soils to the lab or drop off where we are. And this is really done through communication with the local artist or participating in Lafayette art walks, museums, and festivals. All of this I like to package for even broader audience. I don't like living at a university or in Louisiana. So on my website, paltseva.com, you can learn more about projects that we are doing, research that I publish, my media appearances. And on my YouTube channel, you can see video lectures that are available for broader audience by actually some of you here. There are some soil scientists that I know give guest lectures on Zoom and recorded them with their permission, of course. They are hosted on YouTube. And it's a great opportunity to make this science available to other people outside of the US, because I do get, and you probably do the same, requests from other countries because they don't have textbooks or don't know this information. And this is a really cool way to share what we do. And of course, it's an archive for my students to watch on some certain topics and for me to reuse in future classes. But since I'm a 21st century woman, I like to use an Instagram. And here's my opportunity to reach other audiences that otherwise would not want to know about soil. So through my personal experiences and some creative ways, I share knowledge about environmental science, green infrastructure, urban ecology, of course, urban soil and soil contamination, by creating different posts from where I travel, what I do. And it's also my way to bring awareness to this important topic. Coming soon, soon, hopefully, we'll see that I will publish. I'm looking into publishing my urban soil guide that will give an opportunity for people to test soils on their own without using a lab. Of course, some certain, like for heavy metals, you have to use a lab. But for pH or nutrients or some simple stuff that the gardeners don't need to know that much science, they can do it on their own. And it's also a way to learn science and make it involve their kids, relatives into these activities. So in the nutshell, I love to say that my science is people science. And I take the university science down to people through different avenues, through engagement with students when they come to the lab and do research, they do internships, through class assignments. If they miss a lab, guess what they have to do? They will have to go to their relatives and collect those samples from their houses and bring to the lab. This is how we get data from residential areas. And by working through partnerships through NRCS, local government, different professionals, we get access to their properties, and this is how we can collect samples in other private areas otherwise would not have access to. Then we create workshops when we tell people in no jargon English that what does it mean, what we do, and involve children in these fun activities. And then we promote on the social media to share with the world what we do. So the next steps for this activity that I do right now for the couple of years, I'm in Louisiana, is actually map Lafayette for soil contamination. Let's specifically continue Dr. Milky work and look into association between blood lead levels and soil lead, look in other environmental and public health data and map it with contamination, and develop best strategies to use XRF for urban agriculture. And this topic was recently funded by NRCS through cooperative agreement. And continue, of course, public education through different social media channels. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for my funding agencies, partners, and students for making this research real.